And welcome to this Work and Pension Select Committee evidence session with the Secretary of State, McFadden, and his Permanent Secretary, Peter Schofield. Good morning to both of you, and thank you for coming in. I'm going to start with questions, and first of all, I'd like to ask you, 2 years on since the general election, and considering the priorities that were set by the government then, how well do you think we're doing?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Before I come to your question, I should perhaps draw the committee's attention to the fact that this will be Sir Peter's last appearance before you as a committee. I'd like to begin today's session by placing on record my thanks to Sir Peter for his many years' service to the civil service as a whole, but in particular to the Department of Work and Pensions as Permanent Secretary for about 8 years now. He's been an absolutely magnificent public servant. He has led the department through many challenges, perhaps most specifically the COVID period when the country really needed help from the systems that we run. So before coming to your question, I just wanted to say that. Turning to your question.
Can I take the opportunity? I was actually going to do it at the end, but I would like, on behalf of the committee, we've worked over several years now, Peter, since I was a member of the previous Select Committee, but thank you on behalf of the committee for all that you have done, and for your correspondence and support in a number of areas. So thank you.
Very much indeed.
Back to the questions.
Back to the question. I mean, zooming out from the question, of course, it will always be for the electorate to mark the report card, not for ministers themselves. Our job
they would like to know the detail. I mean, we published that. What would you, in terms of your annual report, your scorecard, how do you think you're doing?
I've been there for 9 months. I think the job of the department is got several headings. It, of course, is a critical part of the welfare state. It's there to support those who rely on its help, whether they're pensioners, children, the unemployed, the sick and disabled, and so on. I think that the department does that on the whole well. There is always room for improvement, and there is always a dynamic policy debate about the challenges of the future. And since I was appointed Secretary of State about 9 months ago now, 9 or 10 months ago, the particular challenge I've probably focused on more than anything else is young people and their chances in life, and that's where we've put a lot of energy over the past year. That doesn't mean the department only does one thing. It does lots of things. We pay out state pensions every month. We pay out benefits to people who can never work. And I think it's important that the welfare state is always there for those who need it, but is also adapting to the times and to new challenges. And that's what we're trying to do all the time.
Okay, thank you so much for that. So thinking about the Get Britain Working Programme, a really important one based on what you've just said, Secretary of State. And I think we had the target there of increasing employment by 5% to 80%. It's currently been quite sticky, hasn't it, at 75%. But you may recall, I think it was one of the first meetings that I had with you, Secretary of State, in terms of the Select Committee commissioned a piece of work about estimating what we could anticipate in terms of employment support if we wanted to use employment support to reduce unemployment and economic inactivity for young people and disabled people by 5%. That over the course of the Parliament, we would estimate yields of £22 billion. I just wondered what you thought were with the Connect to Work programme, how close you are coming to that. What numbers of people or proportion of young people and disabled people have gone through the employment support programmes, which there are a plethora, including Connect to Work. What can you tell us about that?
So I totally agree that if you can get people into work, it saves money. It doesn't just save money, it changes life stories. And that is a really important thing to do. In numbers, the simplest picture of this was in Charlie Mayfield's report about keeping Britain working. He used that figure of £1 million. That was for a young person. If you can get a young person into work, it will benefit their earnings by about £1 million over their life and save the state a similar amount of money. On Connect to Work specifically, we published figures, I think, a few days ago about the number of people who had gone through it and the number of people who've been helped in the first year. It's devolved, Connect to Work.
It's been devolved from this year, isn't it?
Yeah, it's been devolved. And when you devolve something, there are lots of strengths and advantages to that, and I think really important strengths and advantages. But one of the things is capacity will differ a little bit in local areas around the country, and in the first year it can take a while to stand up. So I think the figure was 14 or 16,000 people through it so far. Those numbers are growing, and they're growing fast, and that reflects really some work on standing the programme up in its first year.
Do you have an annual profile? I think you just mentioned that there's over £1 billion of employment support that is being devolved from this year. Obviously, Connect to Work has been piloted over the previous year. But what is the annual profile that you are expecting from the devolved monies in terms of getting people into work?
Well, it will depend a bit on performance. It will speed up this year because we spent the first year standing it up. More people are now joining it more quickly. I hope and expect that will continue. And I think there's a really important concept here, which is that we want to bring to an end the era of signed off and written off, where people come to these junction boxes in the system and they're either put into a very intensive work search path or they're put into what has been often a signed off and written off path. And Connect to Work, and really a lot of the employment support that we're putting in place, is designed to not make that junction box such a life-defining fork in the road for people, and that's what Connect to Work is trying to do.
Absolutely. If you are able to provide that evidence to the committee after this meeting, that'd be really helpful.
I want to know more about the forward path of spending.
Absolutely, not just the spending, but how many people you are anticipating to go through. Because if we are still sticking to the targets that we had the ambition to achieve,
we will report regularly to you and to Parliament as a whole on this. It's public spending. It's a commitment to us, and I think the devolved nature of this is really important, Madam Chair, because
agreed, absolutely.
Local labour markets differ.
Yes,
and,
indeed.
So that will probably, but when we agree that, I think it's probably also important that we recognise that will probably mean performance is not the same in every area because it's different.
Understood. People start from a different baseline, but obviously we need to make sure, given it is devolved, our job is to scrutinise you, and you obviously need to scrutinise and monitor what you do.
This is very important because this is the discussion I always have about devolution. We might get into this a bit more in the session, where I say it's a good principle, but in the end, the chain is, of course, if I'm asking the Treasury for money for certain purposes, and then we devolve it, when it comes to a session like this or our oral questions, Parliament will naturally ask me about performance, and they can't always ask the people to whom the money is devolved. So that's an interesting and live discussion in all our devolution debates.
I'm sure you will enlighten us.
Just to give you a sense of the escalation that the Secretary of State has described, 14,000 in the year as a whole, 4,200 in the final month. So you'll see that is escalating very quickly, and we're going to do, it's a 5-year programme, remember, and we're going to get 300,000 folk through the system over the 5 years. And that is something that we have a plan for, and we're going to be overseeing as the Secretary of State has described. And I was in East London only a few months ago, sitting with a Connect to Work advisor with a customer, And you could just see the way that that customer could be supported both in that process of getting a job, but then importantly staying in a job and helping them manage that process, that transition. And you could see the difference that these programs make in real lives.
I'm absolutely agree with you, in agreement with you there, Sir Peter. We were a bit concerned, and that's why we wrote to you directly after going through the mid-year estimates when there was a cut in terms of employment support or an underspend, which was lost. And we were worried about what that actually meant. But that's...
Hopefully my letter reassured you that this is a 5-year programme that will balance out through
yes, in part, but that's we won't go into that detail at the moment. I want to move on to safeguarding. Now, safeguarding, you'll be aware that we're doing a 1-year on inquiry to that. Everybody will be aware of the reasons behind that. That the committee were very, very concerned about the deaths of vulnerable claimants, and we made, I think, 21 recommendations, of which only 4 were accepted by the department. But I want to look specifically on the measures that you can point to in terms of how you are improving safeguarding within the department. And I'm not interested in process measures, I'm interested in outcomes. So what are the measures that you're using to show that you are making a difference in safeguarding in the department?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and I know that you have a deep interest in this. This system across the whole piece is dealing with some of the most vulnerable people in the country. And when it goes wrong, it can result in the worst possible outcomes. And as you know, and as the committee members will know, there have been cases where people have taken their own lives, where coroner's reports have heavily criticised the Department of Work and Pensions following those deaths. And of course, we have to take that extremely seriously. I think the public are probably quite jaded with phrases like lessons learned that are used when disasters take place. And I share their view that people are probably quite sceptical about this. So it's really important that we have, you said you didn't want a process answer, and I don't want to give you one, but just to explain the kind of things that we have in place. It's important that when something terrible happens, you have the deepest possible dive into what are your learnings from that, why did it happen, and so on. And we do that, but that's not enough. You can't just wait for bad things to happen. So where this is probably at its most sharp is in the health assessment field. And all the people doing that now have to have a safeguarding level 3 training. I'll go through that. There's an issue with attrition, which you know about, and a fast turnover of these staff. So the levels that have had that training are very high, but we have to keep up with it, with attrition as people leave and come into that service. My understanding is that in the most recent figures, they have referred about 455, I think is the actual figure, of people for safeguarding reasons. The watchwords are recognise, respond and refer. It's not always the health assessor's personal job to fix the situation, but they should be very alive to it, and they should be referring that person to the appropriate authorities, whether they spot signs of abuse or particular signs of distress or whatever it is. So it has to be a thing that is daily practice, but it also has to be a thing of deep learning when things go wrong, as they tragically have done a number of times in the past decade or so.
In terms of, you mentioned the coroners, one of our recommendation, because again we don't have a real understanding of the numbers of actual deaths, of claimant deaths. We only have the internal process reviews that are reported on, which are bad enough. And as others, the National Audit Office, as one has said, this is the tip of the iceberg. Now, one of the recommendations, which you didn't reject but you didn't accept either, was working with the coroner's office so that you had so we have a clear picture of the number of claimants who are being investigated in their deaths, so that we can understand. We know, for example, those that do get to coroner, some of them, you've had 9. It's not just correspondence from coroner's office. You've had 9 prevention of future deaths report. That's a legal requirement when a death could have been avoided. So that might be something that you want to consider as a metric. But also in terms of what are you doing with the coroners now, so that we have a clearer understanding of the actual scale of deaths of social security claimants.
Well, I have I've got no reason to hide from information. You know, if there's more information, I want to know it. And I do think that our people, when I speak to our work coaches, I think they really try to care for people. But there's no denying that this system has made mistakes. It has made decisions that have contributed to people's distress, and those things have been reflected in coroners' reports, as you say. So if there's more information from coroners that we could use, then of course we should use that. We should never be running away from information that may be there.
Indeed. Well, we look forward to then receiving something from you in writing, if we could, around that, and we'll include it in the review that we're undertaking. I think that would be very, very helpful and very positive. Thank you for that. 2 quick ones from...
Just to add there, Chair, I mean, Secretary of State talked about the number of referrals from clinicians. On top of that, the number of referrals from people who are across the whole organisation over the last 6 months was something like 30,000. And that is something that has changed dramatically over the last 8 years. And I think it is a tribute to the challenge that you brought here in this select committee and in other places, that we have been a listening and learning organisation. As the Secretary of State says, we've got more that we need to get right. But I've tried to make us more of a listening and learning organisation with more transparency about the numbers, about the way we do IPRs. We set out in the annual report and accounts, setting up the serious case panel, the work of our advanced customer senior support leads, working closely with adult safeguarding boards all across the country. So we are out there and trying to change. And I think that the number of people who've been referred, where our frontline folk realise there's something that needs to be done, is a sign of the deep concern that people have, that we want to get it right. We don't always get it right. We want to get it right. We want to improve. And that is part of the culture baked into DWP.
Thank you, Peter. I do want to thank you. I've been doing this for several years now. It is truly shocking, but it's absolutely true. You have moved it on, but if I could gently say, we need to move it on much more. But thank you for what you have done during your term of office. 2 quick ones from me. Last week we heard from Nora, the National Association for Welfare Rights Advisors, that in terms of the carers allowance overpayments, where mistakes have been identified, bureaucratic mistakes have been identified in terms of the completion of expenses claims, that there are opportunities to apply discretion waivers. Could you tell us how many discretion waivers have been passed, have been used?
Well, you mean in terms of civil penalties and things like that?
Yes, where instead of getting to that case where there is a genuine mistake in terms of the...
Well, they do have discretion, but let me... this was an issue in carers allowance that had been, I'm going to say, sitting in the department unresolved and unlooked at for many years, and we're now trying to get a grip of it. And there have been a few issues like that, but this is definitely one of them. And there are several elements to it. One is fixing this issue with overpayments where it wasn't the person's fault and people being fined and all of that. And we're working through that. We started that work a few months ago. And as with what I said on Connect to Work, we're very happy to keep you and the committee up to date with the progress on that. We will go through something like 200,000 cases. The ballpark estimate of these overpayments is around 25,000, I think, and we will try to sort those. There'll then be an issue of how these earnings are calculated, because this is where it goes wrong on averaging, and how you calculate average earnings and all of that, and we're working through that. And then there's the issue of how you fix the policy design going forward, which is really about real-time earnings and having the systems that can adequately cope with that. And in the past, we haven't had that in the way that we have for universal credit. On civil penalties, those who are administering this do have discretion in this. They can decide or not on the basis of the circumstances. So it's not automatic that they have to do that. They're caseworkers. They do have discretion on whether or not they impose such a thing.
Thank you. I'm going to leave it there, but I had two quick ones which I'd be grateful if you could write to me on, and that is in terms of the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman and progress around the action plan, please, but also in terms of the investigation around discrimination of disabled people by the Department for Work and Pensions that the Equality and Human Rights Commission have been undertaking, where we're up to with that.
Do you want to deal with those in writing?
In writing, please, because I'm conscious my lovely colleagues haven't, if that's okay.
Right, yeah.
Thank you very much. Joanna Baxter.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for joining us this morning. We live in a cost of living crisis, and working age benefits lost 8.8% of their real terms value between 2012 and 2024 under the last government. So it's welcome that the Universal Credit Act 2025 increases the UC standard allowance. But can you talk to us about your approach to improving the adequacy of working age benefits over the longer term, over the period of the Parliament, and how should the cost of living be factored into your thinking in that?
Thank you, Ms Baxter. So there's a few things I'd say on that. You referred to the longer term record on this. One of the things that happened during that longer term was a 4-year benefit freeze, but it only applied to some benefits and not to others. And the result of that was the gap between what people could get on standard benefits and on sickness benefits grew. And I think that has become a bigger feature of the system in recent years. Whether it was particularly intended at the time those freezes were introduced, I don't know, but it's a notable feature of a consequence of freezing some of those benefits. So that's the past. To go to the present, you are correct. And partly informed by that, this year has seen the first real terms increase in the standard allowance for many, many years. Now, I think, look, it's tough to live on the incomes that people get under these benefits. But we had that in place. You also have a number of other things that are able to help people with the cost of living. For example, the extension of free school meals to families on universal credit. That can be a very significant expense for low-income families. There is help with that. There is the extension. Not all of these are in the DWP bucket, but if I can speak to the government as a whole, there's the extension of the warm homes discount to more families. That's worth about £150 off energy bills. I think it's 1 in 6 families able to benefit from that now. And of course, the lifting of the 2-child limit for families with 2 or more children, which will have a very significant impact on child poverty. So across the piece, we are trying to help people with the cost of living. The final thing I'd mention on this is the package recently announced by the Chancellor, again aimed at particularly at families over the summer, where she reduced VAT on various things like children's meals and so on in restaurants, to help families where the school holidays can be a very expensive time for families with children. So we're very alive to the cost of living. I hope that recent international news about events in the Middle East will ease the pressure that some thought would come for the rest of this year on the cost of living, but that may not happen quickly. So the consequences of that could still be with us for some time, and people are aware of that, most obviously every time they fill their car with petrol, but in other ways too.
4 years of above inflation increases to the UC standard allowance would take it to about £106 a week by 29/30, which is not a lot. So can you talk to us about how you arrived at that figure, and can you foresee any circumstances in which you might review that during the course of the Parliament, particularly as you've referenced, given the volatile times that we live in, if we are seeing cost of living pressures escalate in some areas, is there any circumstances in which you would review that figure?
Well, look, I mentioned the big disparity between ill health incomes and standard unemployment incomes, if you want to put it like that. The gap between those is somewhat closed by the changes that we are making this year. It's not always a feature of international systems that you have such a big gap. You know, I don't want to make too many promises about up ratings in the future, because we have a system to do this, and it depends on various factors. But we've uprated the benefits last year by inflation. This is more than inflation, this particular benefit, for the reasons that we are discussing. I don't pretend this is easy to live on. I don't think politicians should. We are. The other thing to mention, though, is the standard rate for many people will be accompanied by help with other things, whether that's housing costs, children costs, and so on. Not true for everybody, for single people living in particular circumstances, but for a family, supporting housing costs, it will usually be significantly more than that single standard rate.
So you mentioned sort of international comparators. Have you got any examples of where other countries are doing better in terms of making sure that that gap doesn't exist? Are there other support mechanisms that they have in place?
There's a host of them. I mean, the significant thing, and we may come to this in the discussion about the British system, is that contribution and contributory benefits play a smaller role, significantly smaller role in the UK system, and our system is much more needs-based and means-tested than systems in other countries. That is probably the most significant difference between the two. That leads to a higher level of initial benefits in other countries through the contributory system. Sometimes they have higher taxes too, because they're making those contributions, whereas the big characteristic of our system is that contributory benefits are really, what is it, I think 4% of benefits, and it's almost entirely means tested. I personally think that has political as well as economic consequences in terms of how people see the system, who pays in, who gets out, and all the rest of it. But that is the big British characteristic compared to lots of European countries.
And just finally, have you seen and taken a view on Lord Richard Walker's report to number 10 on the practical steps to respond to the rising cost of living?
Well, we discuss this all the time, and we've been discussing it particularly in relation to events in the Middle East for the last 3 or 4 months. As I said a moment ago, I hope those pressures will ease, but it's a very unpredictable world, and we've had a number of predictions that this conflict would be over and that trade would begin to move. Let's hope that's true this time. I can't know for sure, but we have a live and ongoing discussion about cost of living pressures, policy responses to them. You saw that in the package announced by the Chancellor a few weeks ago for summer. We've had the inflation figures out this morning, which show them holding steady. Some predicted a rise in inflation. I don't want to make predictions about future months, but I repeat my hope, and it can be only a hope because it is unpredictable, that the announcements in recent days will lead to trade moving more freely and a beginning of an ease on energy price pressures in particular, because those energy price pressures are what feed through to the cost of almost everything else.
Thank you.
Thank you. I know Joy Morrissey wants to come in briefly.
Oh, well, you answered my question, which was very helpful. And just, you mentioned contributory benefits. Could you just clarify, but PIP is not means tested, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And
Not an unemployment benefit.
yes.
Yeah.
And with the cost of living, with the Richards report on tackling the cost of living and adopting those measures, do you know how much roughly you think that would cost to increase those changes, to take on some of those changes?
Not all of them, no.
Thank you. And now moving on to Peter Bedford.
Thank you, Chair. So turning to welfare and welfare reform, the OBR projects that welfare spending is set to reach 400 billion by 2030, up from 314 billion when you took office. Health and disability spending is set to top 83 billion next year, which exceeds defence spending of 62 billion, and PIP is now claimed by almost 4 million people. We're almost 2 years into this Parliament. There was no welfare reform bill in the King's speech. Why is that, and what are you going to do about it?
So lots of numbers there. These bills, first of all, the 400 billion, half of that, more than half of that, is the state pension. I don't know whether it's your party's policy to cut the state pension. You can perhaps clarify if it is. But half of that bill that's quoted is the state pension. More than half, I think it's about 55%. On the rising health and disability proportion of that total, it has been rising very fast. It is rising slower in this Parliament than the last, but nevertheless it is rising, and the PIP numbers to which you refer were published yesterday. On welfare reform and legislation, my approach to this I've set out many times, and I'm happy to set it out again before the committee today, Madam Chair. I believe the best way to reform the welfare system is to do more to help get people into work. And that has informed most of the policy that I've announced in my period as Secretary of State. We may have a chance to discuss this in some detail. The youth guarantee measures, the employment support measures that the Chair referred to in her opening questions and so on. In terms of future legislation, we have two very important reviews underway. We have the Milburn report, which is focused specifically on young people, and Alan Milburn published his interim report a few weeks ago. We have the Timms review, which is specifically focused on PIP. I expect an interim report from the Timms review before the summer recess. Both of those reviews will give final reports before the end of the year, and depending on the conclusions of those, which I don't want to anticipate too much here, if there's legislative change needed, it will come after that.
In terms of your longer term strategy for welfare reform, there are concerns that the government's flapping about on this. You know, we had some proposals for savings last year, the £5 billion of savings there was then a U-turn on. We have the PIP policy, which is going to end up costing an extra 3.9 billion, and the 2-child cap as well, which is then going to end up costing additional money to the Exchequer. So there's real concern that actually the policies and the directions actually increasing the welfare bill or not actually reducing it.
The policy direction I've set out, I think, is quite clear, which is to neither circle the wagons around the current system, because I think it spends too much on failure and not enough on opportunity, nor is it to treat the system as a fantasy cash point for every policy going, but instead to reform it, to put work and opportunity at its heart. That's what I'm doing, and I think that is the best way to reform the welfare system. I'm often asked about welfare reform as though it is a high noon moment in Parliament. I think when we put in place the youth guarantee, that's welfare reform. When we put in place more work experience places for young people, that's welfare reform. When I offer employers a hiring incentive to take on young people, because I understand that hiring a young person can sometimes be a risk, that's welfare reform. And critically, to go to the question that the chair opened with about employment support, when you stop the culture of signed off and written off, and you actually extend support to people to get them into work, that's welfare reform. Let me just give you some numbers on this. This, forgive the acronym, Madam Chair, this LCWRA group, which is the Universal Credit Health Group, which previously has been characterised by some, including the Resolution Foundation, as no support, no conditions. We invited a number of those people to come in and get extra support for getting into work. And we had a target of 65,000. We've exceeded that now, and we've had a stronger response than we expected. We expect to have about 100,000 of those people come forward by July, and that shows you that if you stop dealing with people as signed off and written off, and that you actually offer them help and support to get into work, you can have a welfare reform that makes a difference.
So on some of those points you raised, particularly around youth unemployment, which is an area that I'm particularly concerned and interested in, you mentioned some of the policies for reform, particularly in supporting employers to take on young people, but do not accept that actually, because of the broader fiscal policies of the government, that's contributed to that increase in youth unemployment, particularly the national insurance changes and the hostile economic environment to businesses to take on young people. I mean, I spent 20 years before I was an MP working in business. I've worked in many large, many small businesses. I can tell you, they are telling me that those economic conditions are so adverse that they don't want to take the risk of employing young people. What would you say to those businesses?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that the amount of young people in employment has grown by 1.6% since the last election. It's up 59,000. Under the last government, it went up by about 1,000. We have a long-term problem and a long-term challenge. Not in any year since the financial crisis, which is the best part of 20 years ago now, not in any single year under the last government did youth employment levels reach the levels they reached before the financial crisis. So the challenge of NEETs, I don't really like that term, it's not a pretty term, but the challenge of young people and youth inactivity is not a new one. It went up by 250,000 between 2021 and 2024. Now, on the specific policy choices that to which you referred, I think it's really important for the committee will know this, but I'm not sure how widely known it is outside. There is a tax break in place for young employees under the age of 21, where no employer's national insurance is liable unless they're earning more than 50,000 a year, and not many young people that age are earning that. I don't think that's well enough known about, but it is there. With the addition now of a £3,000 hiring incentive, provided the young person has been out of work and claiming universal credit for 6 months, that for many jobs is roughly the equivalent of a year's national insurance contributions. There is both help on the tax side and on the incentive side for hiring young people. The other thing I would mention is changes in the apprenticeship system. For far too long, and the system we inherited was that the bulk of the apprenticeship budget was going on people who were in work and over 25. Now, I am all for in-work training. I think it's a very good thing. I think it's an important thing. But there is a different question as to whether the public apprenticeship budget should be focused on that group or it should be focused on the young. And I believe it should be focused on the young. And from this autumn onwards, that's what we'll be doing.
Earlier you mentioned the TIMS review, so just turning to that, you mentioned that we should receive an interim report by the summer, but my understanding is that the remit is within the existing OBR's HIP forecast. So does that mean that the fiscal envelope is already fixed and the review is essentially just delaying difficult decisions?
No, I think there's been some misinterpretation of this. What we were saying to the review, in fact, I think I think Mr. Darling and I discussed this when I first came before the committee a few weeks after being appointed. What we were saying in the terms of reference was, we were sending a signal to the reviewers not to come forward with a big increase in costs package. There's nothing to stop them coming forward with measures that reduce costs, but we didn't want them to come forward with a review that simply said, let's pay much more into the system. We want to look at the operation of the system, and in particular, I think there's a critical question for the system, which is, you referred to the PIP figures that were published yesterday. They don't only show the numbers claiming PIP, but they also show the conditions. And the conditions have changed over recent years, and in particular, there has been an increase in conditions like anxiety, depression, neurodiverse conditions, and so on. Is this benefit fit for purpose in the way it's designed in dealing with that variety of conditions? And I think that's a very interesting question for the reviewers. When I went to speak to them a few months ago in one of their sessions, that's the question I put to consider. I should say, and I probably said this the last time too, I think Stephen Timms is an excellent person to do this, to co-chair this. He's a predecessor of our current chair in chairing this committee, so he really got deep knowledge of this system, and I believe is highly respected by everybody with an interest in this issue.
Just to clarify, so you're committing to publish the interim findings and the department's own costed options before the review concludes?
Not about costed options before the review concludes, but Stephen and his panel together, I expect an interim report from them, which they're writing, not me, before the summer recess.
It's just a final question from me. So I opened with the OBR's predicted forecast of spend over 400 billion by the end of the Parliament. So just thinking something tangible we can hold you to before your next appearance. You state that one of your missions is welfare reform. What single specific commitment can you give the committee today that we can hold you against that you've been successful in achieving that the next time you appear before us?
That I will always put work and opportunity at the heart of what I do, because what I've tried to do since being appointed is to say that we need to change the question the system asks from simply assessing people for benefit entitlement to asking, how can we help change your life? And I think that is a more dynamic question, a fuller question, a more positive question. We are called the Department of Work and Pensions. We now have skills added to our remit, which makes the W bigger, if you like. So the commitment you can hold me to is that I'll always try and put work and opportunity at the heart of what we do, whether that's dealing with young people, long-term sick and disabled, people who've been long-term unemployed, any of those groups.
Thank you. Steve Darling.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for attending today, Secretary of State.
That's where I was going to come in.
It was just really in respect to the Second Pensions Commission, and where do you see them going? Do you see their next stage as being around pensions adequacy, and what reflections do you have around that world?
Well, first of all, let me thank them for their work. I think they're doing really important work. We had, there's lots of elements to this, but again, to go back in history, the big fundamental reform dating from the latter days of the last Labour government and the early years of the coalition was implementing the Turner recommendations, where we had auto-enrolment, which I think has been a really big policy success for the UK. We're very good in this country at talking about what we don't do well, but that was a big, important policy reform that we did well, and it has given people a measure of security in future pension income that they wouldn't have had if that hadn't come into place. So hats off to everyone involved in that. The task now, of course, is, however many years on it is to look at where were the gaps in that, who was left out of that reform, what should we do about that, and you'll expect the Commission to have identified that even with those good reforms from 15, 20 years ago, there is still a proportion of the British working public who aren't saving enough for retirement, which has implications for their future quality of life. And so the Commission are looking at that in detail and will make recommendations.
And would you support its basic adequacy standards for low earners? Or what other particular? So that feels to me a very big nut to crack. Are there any other nuts to crack? Another one that leaps to mind for me is how women are often left behind because of caring commitments, and therefore their inability to save into pension is hampered significantly.
Look, I think I've not given them any instructions to not look here or not look there. You know, they're free to do their work. Of course, another big reform was the new state pension, starting from people retiring after 2016, which was intended to deal with some of the problems about gaps in the previous system. It was set at a higher level. And that's the system rolling forward, although there is still an issue of, particularly sharp issue of adequacy of pension incomes and pensioner poverty for older pensioners, some of them older women who retired before that date. We may come on to discuss that.
Thank you. And then finally, how do you see the balance between people's expectations between the state pension and where that should be for them and private pension allowances? Do you have any reflections on that, or any core principles?
Well, most people will not be reliant purely on the state pension. Some are, about 20%, but most people have either a state second pension, SERPs, or some other occupational pension on top of that. So it makes sense if people can. I'm not a financial advisor, but it makes sense to invest in a pension. The tax system incentivizes people doing that, as we know, for pension contributions, to not rely purely on the state pension as they get older. So it's a balance between the two. Across governments of different colours, that's what has been encouraged. It works well for many people, but there are people who are not saving enough, and there are gaps in the system, and the Pensions Commission is looking at that.
Thank you.
Can I just add, because I think there are two other really important points coming out of this work. One is in the accumulation phase, the fact that financial returns between different providers varies hugely. And one of the measures in the Pension Schemes Act that Parliament has recently given royal assent to enables a value for money framework that enables much greater focus on supporting savers in schemes which have lower fees and higher returns, which is really important in terms of the accumulation phase. And the second one is the decumulation phase, where at the point people come to retire and they've got a pot of money, making big financial decisions about how to use that pot of money. And so the guided retirement routes that have been legislated for is a really important measure as well. So there's some things that the government is already doing that address some of the points, really important points coming out of the Pension Commission work.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to hand over to John Milne, who would like to go back to looking at welfare reform, which is my fault that I didn't bring him in before.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just briefly. So there's a strong media narrative at the moment that welfare spend is out of control, and Peter gave you a few stats to support that view. Other figures are available. So welfare spend as a percentage of GDP is about where it was under the days of Maggie Thatcher, who was not known for her welfare generosity. And if you look at a specific benefit like PIP, which we've been talking about a great deal, and the rising claimants, perhaps half of that rise is due to things like the rise in the state pension age, reclassification of legacy benefits onto UC. Do you think there is a responsibility for government to put out a more balanced view of the statistics? Because there is, if you think the problem is twice as big as it is, your policy response might overreach by twice as much as it needs to.
Well, there's a lot in that. It has gone up as a proportion of GDP by about 1% over the last 6 or 7 years. And that's
but longer, it goes up and down, but over
pretty,
long...
That is pretty significant. 1% of GDP is quite significant. The part of it that's probably grown more than others is health and disability benefits. Ms. Baxter asked me a few moments ago about the standard unemployment rates. That hasn't been going up as a percentage of GDP. It's probably been going down. What's been going up is health and disability benefits, and Mr. Bedford's question quoted some of the numbers involved in that. Cost is a consideration. Cost isn't a dirty word. We have to look at the cost of the system. I am aware of the cost of the system. I'm aware of these steep increases in health and disability benefits that are often quoted. There's another part of this which I'm keen that we reflect in our discussions, which is life stories and the stickiness, what I refer to as the stickiness of long-term sick and disability benefits, which is that once people are on them, it's very difficult to come off. And there'll be a certain proportion of people who can never work, who are so disabled, their condition will never change, and they can never work, and the welfare state should always be there to look after people in those circumstances. But I believe there is a group, probably a bigger group, who with the right help and support could do some work. The truth is that help and support has not been in place in recent years. I could say gently, it wasn't in place under the time of the last government. We are trying to put more of it in place now, and I think that's really important, that we don't just consider a snapshot of what the system spends, but we also consider the life story over time of what that spending results in. And what I'm keen to do, and I've said this a few times this morning, is to see us invest more in opportunity, training, chances to work, and less on the consequences of those things not being in place. And that is what is informing my policy agenda in the department.
Thank you. There's a lot more to be said about this. Sadly, we're not going to have time today, but thank you for that. So moving back to pensions, as the cost of living is rising again, what plans have you made to ensure that older people on low incomes have the support available to them?
Well, there's really two things in the main. We of course have the basic state pension, which rose by, I think, 4.8% last year, if my memory serves me right. That was worth about £575 a year to people on the new state pension, less on the older state pension, but on the new state pension that was a sizable increase. And for those who don't benefit from that, and we were speaking earlier about it, there is pension credit, and we are always encouraging people to claim the pension credit to which they're entitled. But the committee will know that there's been long-term issues with people underclaiming pension credit and not claiming the help to which they're entitled. We've had lots of information campaigns and lots of efforts, and the numbers have gone up. But that is what pension credit is there for, is for those who don't have access to enough income due to the state pension that they receive. There are other bits of help like winter fuel payments and so on, but those are the two main things.
And in terms of pension credit, so the take-up remains at about 2/3, despite lots of efforts to boost it and promises to boost take-up and by your predecessor. It's a scandal, isn't it, that we haven't managed to do better, and what ideas do you have to improve the situation?
Well, let me take every opportunity, including this one, for anyone watching who may be entitled to pension credit, to encourage them to apply. They've got nothing to lose by applying. I encourage every pensioner who might think they can access this help to take it up. It's theirs as of right. And there has been a long-term issue with some people not doing that. Some pensioners I know are proud. They don't want to ask for help, but I would say to people, it's there for you. If your income and all the other conditions match, then people should apply. I mean, Peter, you've probably got more history than me over various take-up campaigns and so on in this. Is there anything you want to add?
Particularly interested in potential new measures, given that what we've done already doesn't seem to be working.
Yeah, I mean, there have been, as Secretary of State says, a number of campaigns. This has been a passion for the department over many years, all the time that I've been there, to make a difference in the way the Secretary of State has described. We found it's more effective to have advocates who people recognise and aspire to. The great Len Goodman featured in one of our campaigns a few years ago. Late Len Goodman, who was recognised by many, and that we saw an increase as a result of that campaign. Really successful campaign where we were encouraging relatives and friends of elderly people to think about your loved one and think about, are they someone who could be claiming pension credit, and encouraging them and getting around some of the sort of pride issues that the Secretary of State described earlier. Obviously the link to winter fuel payments, when that was there, made a significant difference. The link to TV licences made a difference as well. In the last year we saw an increase in the number of people on pension credit rise by 34,000. So there's some work going on there, but it is a constant work, and we've got constant focus to continue to do that.
Any new ideas in the drawer, or
always new ideas? We have a very creative team who are out there engaging with stakeholders, thinking about new ways of
nothing
doing
specifically planned right now.
We have a new campaign going out again, trying to reach people who have contacts and relatives who may well be eligible for pension credit. I think it's a society thing for us all to be thinking about our older people, our loved ones, our friends, our neighbours. What can we do for people who maybe aren't aware of what they're entitled to? And I think those of us below state pension age can have just as much a role as people we're trying to reach who are of state pension age. I think we should all be taking a responsibility for this, but definitely the department knows what it's trying to do, and there's been a long-term plan, and there's been some movement upwards over the years.
Thank you. I'm taking that there isn't anything really specific in train right now, but so one solution to the problem could be data sharing. You've got plans for a better data sharing of universal credit with local authorities, and that would really help them target support. But those plans seem to have slipped, the iLove programme. So can you guarantee the department will deliver on its current plans to roll this out by 2027?
I think this is a really important point, and I'm glad you've asked about it. Not just for DWP, but across government. Data sharing can really help. And if we're in a world where, when we began our discussion about connect to work and devolved systems and so on, data sharing is a really important part of that. There are trust issues. People want their data to be protected. But my view is we can do more on this. We should do more on this, and it will be helpful. If I can mention in another context, we actually have a new data sharing agreement where we are going to be able to use data from LinkedIn about real-time movements in the labour market. That's us using their data, not the other way around, where we are able to use their data on real-time movements in the labour market to track what jobs people are actually applying to, how careers are changing, and that will help us inform the skills system where we've got Skills England, which accredits and reviews and changes the apprenticeship courses available, be of particular help to them to know what's actually happening in the labour market in terms of people's career movement. So I think data and constant curiosity about what's happening and how it should be better used is a really important tool of public policy.
And one angle there is linking up the eligibility of different benefits for pensioner age. So one of the things we did a couple of years ago was identify those people, and we started it, and we now regularly do this, people who are applying for housing benefit and they're of pension age. That gives us some information that might suggest whether they might be entitled to pension credit, and that can trigger then a reach out to that person to encourage them to apply for pension credit. So we issued 120,000 letters a couple of years ago as the start of that process, and that is now something we regularly do. So certainly we can do more, and we are doing more within the data we've got within the department, and there's more to be done potentially with drawing on data from other organisations.
In terms of the timeline, by 2027? Yes, no?
It's, what, 2027 for what?
The rollout, well, you have a plan to roll out the iLab programme by that time.
Well, if that's what we said, well, you know, we'll check on progress for that. But I think this is an ongoing thing. I don't think data sharing happens just in one move. I think this is a cultural thing across government, across all sorts of departments, and it's one much underused. And I think the lack of data sharing has probably been harmful to public policy, and we need to do a lot more of it.
Thank you.
Last question before we have a little break. Damien Egan.
Thank you, Chair. I've got some questions on the state pension and state pension age. First of all, we've got this date of March 29 for a review of the state pension. So we wanted to know, are we still on track for that, and when you expect to conduct that review?
Yeah, there are periodic reviews of this built into the process. The state pension age has been rising in the last couple of decades. Yeah, I don't want to preempt anything, but that review is built into the process. That's the timescale. I've no changes to announce on that here this morning.
We've met on some of our visits, groups of people in their 60s coming up to retirement age, and we've also had evidence of the impact of the increase, obviously mindful of the cost of the system and why the increase in state pension age was brought in. There have been arguments to say that for some of the poorest in those groups need additional support. So I'd like your, in terms of social benefits, social security, the groups we spoke to, work was a big thing. So yes, yeah. There is that, and half of 60 to 66-year-olds in the lowest income brackets are already frail, so there's a different conversation perhaps there. But the bulk of the people that we spoke to were anxious about, once they'd lost jobs, to be able to get back into the workplace. So quite right, we're also focusing on the young to have the biggest impact. But what would you say to those ones in the older groups?
Look, I think there's a lot there. You know, I'm an optimist about growing older. You know, I hope people see a productive working life, you know, well up in years. And the increase in the state pension age has been accompanied by increasing rates of employment in people close to state retirement age. That's one part of the story. But you're right, there's another part of the story, which is being 67 or 68 years old can feel very different in different parts of the country. I represent a black country, a working class black country constituency with a tradition of physical work, and I know that it can feel quite different for somebody to be 67 or 68 in my constituency compared to leafier parts of the country. So we have to bear this in mind and consider all these aspects when thinking about the state pension age in the future, so that we have a system that's fair to everyone, is sustainable financially, and does the best job it can to give people security in retirement.
Thank you. And Susie Morrissey has been asked to conduct a review in advance of your review. Will you allow that to be published before? It didn't happen under the last government when they made this transition. They published the Secretary of State's review at the same time. But we wanted to know as a committee whether there'd be the opportunity to examine Susie Morrissey's review ahead of your decision.
I'll have to consider that. I don't want to give you the wrong answer, but all the information is very valuable.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just following up on Damien's points, so obviously the Health Foundation has showed that healthy life expectancy is actually fallen by 2 years. That's on average. It'll be worse in places like yours and mine, Secretary of State. How, obviously, the first Pensions Commission pegged the increase in state pension age to life expectancy. That's now an increase, again, not in areas like ours, but overall it is. But healthy life expectancy has declined, and that's an average. Are you considering using that as well as life expectancy as a marker for what you should do around increasing state pension age?
I think we should consider all these factors. I'm very conscious and stand by what I just said to Mr. Egan about, you know, how the same age can feel quite different or be quite a different experience for people in different parts of the country. So these are difficult decisions. I'm not trying to duck it when I say this. So you have to take into account the affordability for the country, because it's a pay-as-you-go system. Even though it's a contributory system, it's actually in real, the way it really works, it's a pay-as-you-go system. It's got to be affordable. It's got to give people security in retirement, but it's got to take into account the factors that you raise as well. I think we owe that to the public. So it's a very delicate decision, and that's why we do these careful reviews, so that all these things can be taken into account.
Thank you. And on that point, we'll have a short break, 5 minutes back just before 22, please. Welcome back to this evidence session from the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions and his Permanent Secretary as well. So we're going to move on now, and we have Steve Darling, who's got the next question.
Thank you. And my line of questioning is to the Permanent Secretary, first of all. And it's in a statement you've said that 71% of claimants feel that they're treated with respect. That clearly means that almost 30% do not feel that way. Are you comfortable with that? And equally, what tangible plans do you have in place, and what evidence do you have to be able to say that you're trying to grow that number of people who do feel that they're treated with respect?
Well, thank you for the question, Mr. Darling, and it's absolutely the heart of what I want to do. What I wanted to do is leading this organisation for all our customers, quite as you would understand, to feel that they are treated with respect, and that is absolutely something that we seek to do. And that comes on a number of different levels, doesn't it? It comes in terms of treated with respect in the way that their initial inquiry is treated, that the telephone is answered quickly, that people have an online journey, if that's the right approach for them, that works for them, through to some of the more difficult parts of the system. And we've talked before quite a lot about the health assessment process, where you're getting into quite intrusive questions and quite intrusive investigations, because that's necessary to determine eligibility of the benefit. So within all of these systems, there's a whole load of things we're doing differently as part of our transformation programme, doing more to enable people to access our DWP services online. So one important case would be child maintenance. Some of the most sensitive conversations we have are with families where the parents have separated. How do you enable people to engage with us in a way that works for them at a time that works for them? And our My Child Maintenance claim system that we've been rolling out enables people to engage with us 24/7 whenever it's convenient for them. That's an example of that. Obviously, we've talked before about the TIMS review, looking at the way that the PIP process works. And the important part of that, doing that in a wholly new way for us as a department, in a co-created way with people representing those with disabilities and those with lived experience, and doing that in a careful, joined-up way is really important to getting that right. We've talked in this forum before about the health transformation programme, where we're enabling more and more people who are applying for health benefits to have a case manager to support them along the way, so that when they make their initial inquiry, they've got someone who can tell them about the benefit, and then at the end of the day can explain the decision that's made. So the whole host of different ways. And how do we measure it, which is, I think, at the heart of your question. We're doing more to do surveys of our reputation. What do people find? What do people think they value about us? What are how we thought of compared to other organisations? And charting that as we go along, alongside the measures that we report annually in the annual report and accounts around customer satisfaction for each of the benefits, and seeing how that changes over time.
And one of the tools that I know people can use in large organisations to get under the skin of challenges for people is having a level of professional curiosity. How do you foster that within the organisation? Do you have any training around professional curiosity?
Professional curiosity is such an important part of how we need to lead an organisation. That's something that we're rolling out more and more in terms of what we do, in terms of the values that we set, in terms of the way we encourage that, in terms of some of the training that we do. So, for example, we're rolling out our coaching academy for job centre work coaches, and helping them to think about how they use professional curiosity in the way that they work with claimants in that way. But I think there's a fundamental thing, trying to change the culture across the organisation such that frontline folk think about all the time, how can we improve the service that we've got? And I think my honest answer is I think we've got further to go there. The number of times I'm out, I try and be out and about in the front line every Thursday, and I try and spend time with frontline folk. And I'm regularly there thinking to myself, why are you doing this particular process? Why is this the way that this works? Yeah. And I ask the colleague, well, why is that? It'll be, well, this is what we're told to do, or this is a policy, and we don't think we can change it. And, we've tried to change that, and that's one of the culture changes I've tried to embed through the organisation. But we've got further to go. I haven't fixed that by any means, and my successor can take that on.
And I'm also very much alive to the Liz Sayce review, and she identified that sometimes when things went wrong, managers then kind of like manage down the, or don't worry to the people who are operating the system. How do you think, and it goes back to what you've been talking about so far, culture, how do you develop more of an aviation culture where when things do go wrong, there's a sharing so that there is a opportunity to learn from that rather than trying to a certain extent bury it?
So much in that. It's such a brilliant question, and that's the harder things. I mean, from my role at the top of the organisation, trying to encourage people to escalate things when they emerge, so I know about things early on and we get that culture of escalation. There tends to be a bit of a culture of we'll fix it before we tell anyone senior about the problem, so we can tell them there was a problem but we sorted it out. But I want people to tell me before the problem is sorted out so that we can aerate that and understand it a bit more and get to the bottom of that and find wider solutions that might address it. So that's one of the elements to this. It goes to the heart of how we try and encourage people to work with internal audit and try and help people to work across their teams. But it's also encouraging people to innovate and try new things. And I love the fact that as I go around, I talked about some examples of where people say, well, I have to do what I do. But I also love the examples of people who say, oh, Peter, now you're here, we'd love to show you this new thing. Love to show you the way we're using AI to help us do our work and augment the work that we do. And we've got some clever thing that we've developed here. I was in Norwich a few weeks ago, and they were showing me the use of AI in report writing and how that is taking 15 minutes off each of these particular cases, and then sharing best practice across the piece. So getting that culture, that sense of excitement about new things that can be done, and that sense for everyone at every level of the organisation. It's one of the things I've been saying as leader throughout my 8 years. Leadership is not about grade, leadership is about attitude, and we can all be leaders. I want everyone in DWP to have felt that they were leaders while I've been there, have the opportunity to change the organisation within frameworks that we set from an accounting point of view as well, but to feel they've got that opportunity and that passion and that opportunity to innovate.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Lee Barron.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And my question's around the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman. Over 2 years ago, they identified a systematic failure in how DWP responds to what research and feedback is telling it. You're committed to learn from mistakes and develop an action plan. I was wondering when you expect to publish that.
Is that for me, Mr. Barron, or for the...
I don't mind.
Over
2 years ago, so...
Well, we talked when I was here before about the action plan, and the action plan is something that we've been working since I was here before. Obviously, since then, the Secretary of State made his decision on the WASPI case, so that has unlocked the conversations that we've been having with the Ombudsman. We'd previously had 2 workshops with the Ombudsman about the action plan. We've since then been working on a draft. We've been sharing drafts. We've had the latest set of comments from the Ombudsman back. I think the Ombudsman now has no further comments, and so we're in a position where we can publish the action plan very shortly. But the action plan is just the start of the process.
Sorry?
The action plan is just the start of a process, because the way that we communicate with people obviously has changed very dramatically since the issues raised by the WASPI case back in 2005 to 2008. So how do we learn and grow and use digital means in different ways? And also how we learn from complaints. So that's all set out in the action plan at the start of a process.
When will that be published, you say, shortly?
Shortly.
Any kind of...
I imagine in the next week or so.
I think we're quite close.
Okay. Having gone through the process to develop the action plan, what changes do you think are needed in the way the department operates?
Well, you'll see when it's published, what we're trying to do through the action plan is learn from what happened before and think in particular about how we communicate with people. And how you communicate with people and where they get their information from now is, of course, vastly different to the way it was in the past. You see that in the way people consume media, physical newspapers versus electronic media and so on. There's big changes going on, and we have to, and the whole of government has to respond to that in the way that we communicate with the public. So that's the heart of it.
I mean, there's obviously threats and dangers in relation to how people do get a lot of their information, because if it's based around social media, you don't even know whether or not that's...
There's trust issues.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think gov.uk, one important platform for us, very important platform, is trusted and should be trusted. But you're right, there are trust issues in how people get their information, and this is a challenge for government right across the board, not just in our department, and we have to be alive to it, and the communications departments which exist in every department have to change with the times.
Yeah, I think it was just trust though, was it? It was also about, we were talking about the DW as a learning department, but it wasn't responding to data and research and information that was being provided about issues. One of the things that was revealed was the issue around communications, but it's also about being open, transparent, responding to information as it's presented, to information evidence as it's presented to the department. I think that's...
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And
yeah.
one of the things that the Ombudsman's been working with us closely on is how do you use complaints more effectively as a feedback mechanism.
It's very impressive what they're doing, it really is.
Yes, and,
yeah.
And Paula has had a number of workshops with my senior team to go through that. Very much her watchword is complaints are a gift. And I'm not sure whether it necessarily feels like that, but we need to open ourselves up for that to be a feedback loop.
Indeed, absolutely.
I feel we've been doing that before, but not as effectively as we should be, and so we need to build on that.
Yes, thank you. Commissioner Ali.
Thank you. So, Secretary of State, obviously the removal of the two-child policy cap is a huge step forward. It will remove 450,000 children out of poverty. And the child poverty strategy is expected to lift only 100,000 out of poverty. The principal economist from IPPR, Henry Parkes, acknowledged that this would happen, but in effect what it does is it counters the rise by the end of this Parliament. So it wouldn't, overall child poverty numbers wouldn't be terribly lower. So when you compare the last Labour government's interventions, appreciate that circumstances were different. Many would argue there was a much more ambitious focus on reducing child poverty. Legislation was introduced, targets were set. Do you think that the government should consider setting a target to reduce child poverty further?
Well, I'm one of the few old-timers
Yeah.
who served as a minister in both governments.
Mm-hmm. That's why I'm asking you the question.
Thank you. I often get treated as a walking history book. I don't know if it's a compliment or not. But I think that's a little bit unfair, the comparison there. This government will do more to tackle child poverty in a single parliament than I think any of its predecessors. The measures that we've taken, not just the two-child limit, but the free school meals for families on universal credit, the energy help that I referred to earlier, the Crisis and Resilience Fund, the cost of living things that have been announced by the Chancellor, they all show a commitment.
Yeah. Can I just on that, it's a really important point, yeah. And the wider interventions, they're absolutely right. And when you add all of that, the sum of those policy interventions, it's huge. Have you, working with other departments, looked at what impact those policies would have in bringing down child poverty further in this Parliament? And if you haven't, could you look at that?
Yeah.
Because I think that would give us more confidence in looking at what policies could be, encouraged further. Because while we can see the positive steps, the reality is, that if at the end of this Parliament the numbers don't go down that much, recognising the challenges that were inherited, then that's not ambitious enough.
Well, it's a very good question, and the answer is yes. This is not one and done. There is an ongoing cross-government effort. In fact, the interministerial group on this meets later today, jointly chaired by my colleague, the Minister for Employment and the Minister for Children. They're working on this together, and their job is to drive this across government so that you don't have a situation which happens perhaps too often in government where something's announced, people think that's it, and you move on to the next thing. So we don't do that. But in terms of your interpretation of the numbers, I would use there's a parallel here maybe with NHS waiting lists. NHS waiting lists are falling now for the first time in many years. But the comparison isn't just to what you inherited, it's to what the trend was if you hadn't done anything.
Yeah, no, I
so
accept
I
that.
think that's a really important thing when we judge the numbers, the success of this, and the political effort going into this.
Okay.
We did not inherit a static state, either on child poverty or on NHS waiting lists. We inherited an upward curve. We now, in both areas, have a downward curve. That's really important in interpreting.
I have acknowledged that point in the outset, and I was involved with the child poverty strategy. I appreciate the challenges. There's a wider issue about the 10-year strategy, which the child poverty strategy referred to, but it doesn't contain plans or projections for the next 10 years. Could you assure us that work will be done to give us line of sight on what that would look like?
Well, I'm going to be slightly partisan here, Madam Chair. I hope that's forgivable. I try not to do it too much in front of a cross-party body like this, but I would say, as long as my party's in power, I think this will be a priority.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just mention, the chair of the Education Select Committee and I were disappointed that we weren't able to meet with you and the Education Secretary at the meeting in the next couple of weeks. Absolutely understand and have huge regard for the ministers who have responsibility around delivering this, but what we had wanted to do within the poverty was explore some of the questions that Rushnara has just asked you. All the evidence is, and we've talked about evidence this morning a lot, all the evidence is that when you have targets, you achieve more. If I pick up what Rushnara said about the 2010 progress, look at what's happened in Canada, in New Zealand, about targets. And academics have really pushed on this point that without binding targets, we minimise what we can do. So absolutely recognise the immense progress and commitment that the government has shown, and it is wonderful. But this would add, it would be the cherry on top of the cake, all right? So if I could just emphasise that point. And leadership, we've also talked about leadership today, the importance of that being demonstrated by your gracious self. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I think it's right that people push for more. I totally understand it. I spoke to the Child Poverty Alliance in a speech last week or the week before, and they said pretty much what you've just said, or a similar version. They were very pleased with what had happened, but they want to push for more. And, you know, it is good that organisations campaign to do that. One of our sister parties had a slogan, something like "proud but not satisfied," and maybe that's people should push for more. But you probably expect me to say, just to acknowledge what has been done in this area. And the other thing which we've touched on a few times this morning, Madam Chair, is life stories. And I think it's really important that this is seen in the context of life stories and not just an income snapshot. And that's something I stress all the time, because we know that children who are less likely to be poor will do better at school and have better chances in life and so on. I think that's a critical part of this story.
If I could just absolutely recognise what you're saying, and our roundtable in the next couple of weeks is specifically with people with lived experience. But the evidence is, and we're talking about life stories, and that there will also be fewer, for example, young children that go into care as a result of a targeted approach. I mean, this is the evidence. This isn't being unreasonable, but I'll leave it at that if I may. John Milne.
Thank you, Chair. This is a question which optimistically should be capable of a yes or no answer. So are you, or will you be raising the threshold for access to UC Health to age 22 as previously laid out?
I want to consider all of this after the reviews that I referred to, in particular the Melbourne one with regard to young people later in the year. So I don't want to be ruling things in or out today.
Well, not yes or no, but it is an answer. So thank you. Talking about the Melbourne reviews, so probably the line in it that's been most quoted is that he said that right now we're spending £25 on benefits and about £1 on actually getting people into work, which is obviously an alarming ratio. Now there's a couple of ways of interpreting that. I interpret it as being, he's saying not that let's slash benefits, but let's invest more on getting people into work. It's kind of like it's neutral on whether benefits would reduce if you succeeded in getting people into work. How do you interpret it? Do you think it was a call to reduce benefits, and do you think that of itself would fix the job just by cutting access?
Well, I think, first of all, I should say I'm really grateful to Alan Milburn for the work he's done on this. I think you had him before you quite recently for an evidence session. I hope you found that valuable. I thought his report was incredibly powerful. On that 25-to-1 ratio, I want to change that equation, and that's why I put forward a £2.5 billion investment in the Youth Guarantee to expand opportunity for young people. I think the system does need changed in that direction. Instead of spending, as I said in response to one of the earlier questions, on the consequences of people being inactive, let's invest in them becoming active. And to go back to life stories, there's some striking figures on this. If a young person goes on to the benefit you asked me about a moment ago at age 20, they're more likely to celebrate their 30th birthday and still be on that benefit than to have had a steady job for any year in between. We often think of ill health or long-term sickness benefits as being something that would apply particularly to old people. And in terms of the stock of people on them, that's probably true, but there's been an increasing trend of young people now where that in the young person's universal credit caseload, people under the age of 25, the proportion of those young people on long-term sickness benefits has doubled in the last 6 years or so. So there's a big thing happening there that should really give us all pause for thought. More than that, it should be a call to action to invest more in opportunity for those young people. And that is why I have talked so much in the last 9 months about trying to get young people into work, trying to get more employment to support them, trying to change the apprenticeship system, trying to get more work experience for them, and everything that I'm trying to do. I'm not saying that's going to be enough. I think we'll have to do more when Alan Milburn reports in the autumn, but I think it's a really good start and an important change in the direction of the system.
I absolutely agree with everything you say about the importance of ending this neat issue altogether. I don't see why we can't, actually, if we try hard enough. And I appreciate there's things that the government is doing right now that should bring the numbers down. Now, that of itself will therefore bring the benefit bill down as well. So, but do you think that cutting access to benefits today is a tool that you want to use because you believe it would also reduce will solve the problem, or would it just reduce the bill?
Well, I'm not announcing benefit changes today. We've just implemented a benefit change from April, which the committee will know about, on UC Health, where we have cut in half the difference between the UC Health rate for new claimants and the standard rate. And it goes back to the questions Ms Baxter raised me. There's two parts to that. There's what you get on UC Health, and there's also what you get on the standard rate. It's important to consider both of them. So we have made a very significant change there, probably one that hasn't had much attention because of the furore over everything else that happened last year. So we have done that, but I don't have any further changes to announce today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lee Barron.
Yeah, just in terms actually of the youth and NEET rates, is there a target in terms of the reduction?
Like the question of child poverty, the chair asked me a wee minute ago. We don't have a formal target, but I really want to get these numbers down. Let me tell you what's achievable. I spent last Thursday in the Netherlands, which has a NEET rate 1/3 of ours. I recommend the committee to have a look at what they're doing in the Netherlands if you wish at some point.
We did have international guests at one of our sessions.
You know, and what was really striking about the visits and the discussions I had with my opposite number, the minister there, and everything we visited was they don't have one intervention or one fork in the road, the way that our system is characterised by. They have multiple interventions to help young people all the way through, right up until the age of 27. Wow. Where it's work experience, it's training, it's going to college, it's intervention after intervention at age 16, 18, right through the system. Very, very active support for young people. And they do have a rising rate of youth unemployment, but it's a lower level than ours, and it's just a more active system. And you can't lift and shift entirely from one country to another. There's always different traditions and so on. And I don't pretend you can, but I think there are lessons we can learn from what they're doing and from other countries who've got lower rates of youth inactivity than we do.
I think there's also a call for action for the civil service and how we do business. And increasingly the focus needs to be on working across boundaries, across departmental boundaries. So working around the lives of individuals and around the lives of cohorts, young people. The way it can work in the Netherlands and elsewhere is because they don't necessarily have that kind of siloed approach, and we've got to look at this across systems as well as within systems.
I think in relation to two targets would be one way of addressing obviously the success of anything. The DWP have said that there's, I think it's 500,000 opportunities for young people that have been identified. I mean, is that a start in?
Yeah, that's true. And some of those are work experience. For example, 300,000 more work experience opportunities. These are really important. And by the way, work experience is taken very, very seriously in the Netherlands. And one of the startling facts in the Milburn report was that a majority of those million young people who are have never worked. Now, there's a tendency to sort of, you know, in my day, this and that. I don't really mean that, but you know, I remember the jobs I had as a teenager, delivering newspapers or stacking shelves in newspapers or cutting people's grass or whatever I was doing. The sense of pride and purpose in being able to earn your own money is really important for young people, and too many young people are not getting that. And then if you add AI hiring and this soul-destroying experience that young people go through where they apply for maybe 200 jobs, it's all AI, they don't even get a response. There's a lot of things going on here which we as a government have got a duty to try to respond to with that question in mind: how do we help young people? I think the narrative around young people is far too negative. All this stuff about young people being written about as snowflakes and shirkers and not wanting to do anything. The young people that I meet want to work, they want to have a chance. It's up to us to give them a platform to do that. So in the things you've mentioned, I think this issue of work experience is so important because it helps get them out of that bind of, well, you can't give you a job because you've got no experience. Well, how are they supposed to get experience? So we've got to help them.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And we're now on to Johanna Baxter. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And just staying on the subject of NEETs, and again, I hate the term as well, but that's the one we're using. Tackling this is going to really need a whole government approach. So I think Sir Peter just referred to it as being across systems rather than just within them. What does your experience tell you about the adequacy of cross-departmental working in order to achieve an aim like this in terms of reducing the number of young people not in education, employment or training?
It's a brilliant question. And if I could use perhaps a slightly Whitehall phrase, Madam Chair, it's a challenge. And it's been a challenge for a long, long time. And I always say human beings do not live their lives according to our departmental boundaries. They really don't care much about what's the responsibility of the DWP or the Education Department or the local authority or the Department of Health or any of that. So we've got to treat people as people. And what I would say to encourage you is that the Secretary of State for Education, Secretary of State for Health, really take this seriously. They are as committed as I am to an agenda for opportunity for young people. Let me give you one example where I think things are being done in a more imaginative way. I visited a youth hub in Tower Hamlets the other day, and this is about getting employment help and support out of the job centre and into the community, and we're opening many more of them around the country, sometimes in partnership with a local football club or rugby club or whatever. And it brings together not just job finding help, but mental health help, housing help, debt advice help, because people are people. They're not just dealing with one thing. It's not a linear, we're going to take you and it's just all about work. Sometimes there are some things that need to be sorted out before people get there, and the Youth Hub can be a really positive way to do that. And to go back to my Netherlands trip last Thursday, what was really interesting was I went to a youth hub in the south of The Hague, and it was almost exactly the same as what we were doing in Tower Hamlets. Same services, same feel when you went in. And if you talk to the DWP staff who work in them, sometimes it's a couple of days a week, they're really positive about it. It's a different atmosphere for the young person going in. And so I think we've got to be imaginative about that cross-departmental challenge. I think it's a great question. It has bedeviled governments of all colours for many years, but this is so important that we cannot allow departmental boundaries to get in the way of opportunity.
I'm going to develop this a little bit further. So do you think in terms of that cross-government working, some sort of cross-government strategy on youth employment would help get departments working together? Is there an interministerial group in the way that you mentioned in one of your earlier questions for this subject as there is on child poverty? What I'm trying to get at is what are the tools to get those different departments to engage more on this issue so that it's ingrained in their thinking rather than just actually we need to remember that Pat's asked us to do X, Y or Z.
Well, we mustn't fall under the illusion that a committee is the answer.
Just one
no,
with honourable exception.
Great respect to this body, but you know, that's the classic way of dealing with this. And I don't want to knock it, or maybe I just did, but I don't think, you know, just saying we'll have a cabinet committee. There may be a role for that, it may be a good thing, and interministerial groups I think can do really good work. But what I think is more important is a shared political commitment that it's a priority. And I'm really grateful, by the way, I mentioned Secretary of State for Health and Education. I'm enormously grateful to the Prime Minister and to the Chancellor for their support for this agenda. I had to go to the Chancellor and ask her for money for the Youth Guarantee when I know there are many, many other calls on the public purse. And she was willing to support that. The Treasury was willing to support that. So the centre of government, in terms of Number 10 and the Treasury, are supportive of this agenda. I've heard the Prime Minister talk about it, and I believe this is an agenda for all seasons, and it should be a real national cause for us, and I want to beat the drum for it, not just in terms of what government should do, but out there talking to business. Another appointment we made recently was Mark Boland as the department's lead NED, who's someone with great business experience, former chief exec of Marks and Spencer's and Morrison's, fantastic business contacts, the founder of Movement to Work, which has helped 200,000 young people get into work since the time of the riots in 2011 after it was set up. So we've got a lot of people really committed to this right across the board.
So you've talked there about joining up different bits of UK government. You've talked about joining up services at a local level through the youth hubs, which I think are really important. There's an added element to this picture, though, in respect of Scotland, because, of course, we have another layer of government there, and you just talked about having a shared political agenda. How will you make this work in places like my constituency, in Paisley and Renfrewshire South, where we have another government that holds many of the levers of power on this? And I look to some of the services in my area. Employability services have been cut by 30%. That's not by the UK government. And apprenticeship places are down at one of their lowest levels in the history of devolution. Those are two really important ways in which we can try to tackle this issue of NEETs, but you have no control over it. But your department is responsible for bringing down the NEET figures. So how are you going to join up what the UK government wants to do and what's going to happen to my constituents in Paisley and Renfrewshire South with the SNP government sitting between the two?
We have to work with the devolution settlement. I think somebody asked me earlier about the previous government, and I said I was one of the old-timers, the previous Labour government, I was one of the old-timers who'd served in both, and of course it's the previous Labour government that established the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Senate. And we respect the settlement. It's important to say seriously, we respect the settlement. You are correct to say that there are significant parts of the issues that I've been talking about today, specifically the education and skills and apprenticeship system, which are devolved. I would hope that governments of all colours would want to do more about youth opportunity and young people's, the rate of inactivity that we're currently seeing. It's in no one's interest to not take this seriously. So I would hope to have a good and constructive dialogue with the Scottish Government about this. There are certain elements of this which are held by the UK Government, much of the youth guarantee, the employer subsidies, for example. We have a job centre network that is GB-wide. Northern Ireland is a slightly different situation where the system, the social security system is devolved, although in practice Northern Ireland follows what the UK government does on these things very closely, but that's slightly different. The truth is, devolution is here to stay. We have to work with the system which our previous government legislated for, and I hope that to some extent, as the Americans say, people can check their politics at the door and share in an agenda of young people work and opportunity.
And I see that locally as well. I mean, just to give you an example, in Cardiff, of course, across England, we are bringing together the career service and the job centre network. In Cardiff, as in all parts of Wales and Scotland, the career service is devolved. But I met career service folk there, and they're engaging in the same way as we're engaging across England, ahead of the merger in England, thinking about how we bring together that offer. So you meet a work coach and you meet a careers advisor in a structured way, have the right conversation with the right person, that strategic conversation with the careers advisor about what your skills are and what the local opportunities are, embedded then into an action plan that is then overseen by the job work coach along the way. So we can make it work. And I pay tribute to our local staff, both in the devolved teams and in my own teams, who are trying to make it work on the ground in a way that joins up around the young person.
I should have also added, Ms Baxter, I went to Hampden Park a few months ago and announced 80 new youth hubs, a proportion of which were in Scotland. So there are youth hubs. We are setting up youth hubs in Scotland too.
And have you spoken to the Scottish Government about those elements that they have control over to try to ensure that there is political buy-in?
We always have a positive and constructive dialogue with the Scottish Government.
Thank you. I'm going to have to move us on. If we could have more succinct answers, I'd be very grateful so we can finish on time. Rishnara Lees,
Thank you. I had a couple of supplementaries. In relation to devolution, what sort of framework have you got, and what's the thinking around poor performers? There's no point putting, there's lots of great examples of devolution and results and better than what the centre can often do, but there's no point in putting good money after bad if the outcomes, if you've got a poor performing authority or agency, and we can all think of them, how will you make sure that oversight, it's picked up in the Alan Milburn report as well, that oversight from the centre is there and it's driven through, because you, Secretary of State, you are ultimately responsible and accountable for the results in your department, and it's we don't want to see a kind of postcode lottery of what happens in terms of the resources that you put in and not get the outcomes.
It's a great question, and it needs really careful work. I am more optimistic than some about this. I think, I spoke to the Mayor's Council a couple of weeks ago that met in York, and we talked about this. I think that the new devolution structure that's developed in the country in the last 15 or 20 years with these powerful elected mayors has got a lot to offer to this agenda. We've already done some things, youth trailblazers, economic inactivity trailblazers, connect to work that the chair asked me about at the beginning. I think we can do more, but it has to be under the right understanding of what money is for and the outcomes that we're trying to drive. And outcomes is the most important thing, because if we're honest, there are loads of organisations. I bet every one of the elected MPs around this table could name organisations in their area, lots of organisations trying to help people into work. And they're all trying their best. But what we really need to look at is outcomes. How many people did you actually get into work? And so the dialogue I think that we need to have with this new and emerging devolved setup is, if we allocate money for young people, for long-term unemployed, for sick and disabled people, whichever group, it should be spent on that group. It should be outcome focused. There'll be an accountability framework, but within that, you know your labour market, you know your own local health service setup, you know your own local structures, so there should be flexibility within that.
My final question is about the deficit model that Alan Milburn talks about. You spent considerable amounts of time in the Treasury, in opposition and in government. What do you think needs to change in terms of how funding formula is established? So if you do very well, doesn't mean that money will follow in your department. How does government and Treasury incentivise departments to focus on the capabilities model, which is what we need to do in terms of getting young people into work, rather than a deficit model, so that it drives innovation and improvement rather than continue to fund, there's a structural problem here, continue to fund things that aren't working, or that is, the ratio that he pointed out, where we're spending £1, the equivalent £1 for, positive measures versus the deficit measures.
Well, that goes right through the system. The questions that we ask people when they're qualifying for benefits, or certainly sickness and disability benefits, are all about what you can't do.
Sorry, my point is about national government and how the Treasury does funding formula.
I know. And so what I think we have to do in terms of tackling what you call the deficit model is change the exam question the system asks from what are you entitled to how do we help you change your life. And once you've decided on the right exam question,
with
from
the greatest
then
of respect,
policy follows.
My question was about how the Treasury allocates funding to departments, given the point that was made by Alan Milburn in relation to how money is being stuck in effect, in dealing with and paying for, in this case, benefits versus interventions, which we would all like to see more money going into. The 1 billion is a huge achievement to support people into work.
So with Treasury funding, this is a part of the dialogue with local authorities, is if we do well, do we benefit financially? The problem, I mean, the obvious question is, what if you don't do well? Who picks up the tab? And that is not always an easy discussion in terms of what you describe as the deficit model. So I think part of the dialogue has to be, how do you realistically, within the funding mechanisms that we have, do risk sharing and benefit sharing? And it's an important and legitimate part of the discussion.
Thank you. And on that point, we're going to move swiftly on to Steve Darling. And if we could have 2-sentence answers, please.
Leets, I'd suggest you use that instead of needs, as in looking for, rather than not in, because that's a more positive speak with you not liking the needs approach. I'd suggest that you've described a bit of a quest that you're on, and whilst you're not necessarily looking for the Holy Grail or one ring to rule them all, how are you marshalling your fellow people on the quest? Because I was a bit worried, you've talked about the Secretary of State Education in respect of the for health as well, but not the Business Secretary. And how are you driving that quest, and why not set a target? Because if it is if it's a genuine target that you're going for, then why not?
Well, the Secretary, I can assure you, the Secretary of State for Business would share my view about youth opportunity and work, and we're good and close colleagues. Perhaps we could set a target. I'm not, I don't have religion one way or the other about it, but nor do I think you described the Holy Grail. I don't think a target is always the Holy Grail. It may help, but I hope that I've been clear in taking the Chair's instruction to be brief here. I hope I've been clear what the priority is and what we're trying to do.
Thank you. And then the Trailblazers programme, bearing in mind the number of different programmes that are all around there as well, as part of the Youth Guarantee, are you able to unpack a little bit more some learnings from your trip to the Netherlands?
The Trailblazers are local projects for mayors in this country with a lot of flexibility to try to help young people into work. And given that they have a lot of flexibility, being candid, I would expect probably different results in different areas, with some having more success than others. That's probably in the nature of it. But that's why we did that. In terms of the Netherlands visit, I think it's probably just the real benefit of having a focus on this and an understanding between government, education and the business community in particular, that this is a big priority, that it's in the national interest, and I hope we can develop a shared sense of cause about this in a way that I do believe they have in the Netherlands.
Thank you.
Thank you. Damien Egan.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions on apprenticeships. If I direct to you, Sir Peter, on the first ones. We've seen the apprenticeship levy evolve into new growth and skills levy, which is welcome and more flexible. I feel like it took a long time from industry and employers saying to the department around what wasn't working before things have changed. It's obviously very welcome that with the new government that has been put in. How will we know that the new changes are working?
It's an important point, and of course this is something that the department was glad to take over in September last year as part of the machinery of government change. A big focus here is the contribution towards rebalancing the way we're using the careers, growth and skills levy to young people, and to focusing in on some of those important roles that are related to the gaps in the labour market. We link that as well to the work we're doing in terms of skills plans for each of the main sectors related to the business growth strategy, the 8 sectors, and then 2 others related to hospitality and construction, where we think there are important opportunities for growth as well. And pulling them together, so you've got a very, very clear kind of supply side and a very clear demand side, and seeing how they relate together. And that's something we need to keep up to date, but it goes back to our relationship with employers and the role of Skills England, who in a way are the bridge between them, the conversation with regularly out and about with employers, identifying skills gaps, and then working with training providers to make sure that those gaps are filled by the provision that comes through. And we're working closely with Skills England to think about the career path and the journey, the pathways that take people from education into those important roles in those growth sectors in the economy, and thinking about how training providers can provide those routes funded by the skills levy as we develop that going forward. So something really important, and it's as we've taken on these responsibilities since September, really keen to embed that in the heart of everything else we do to support young people through that journey.
Thank you. And then for you, Secretary of State, it might be more reflections on your trip to the Netherlands, but people have often talked about a lack of parity of esteem between the apprenticeship route and the degree route. I think there's a big shift in that, but could go further. So I'd like your reflections and whether there's anything you saw from the Netherlands.
Great point. A great point. It's absolutely true. Look, I believe that expanding university participation has been a big advance in society. When I went to university 40 years ago, working class people at universities were as rare as hen's teeth. That's not a good situation. It was a lot of people cut off from opportunity, and I'm really glad that the last Labour government played a big role in changing that, because I think it's opened up huge opportunity for working class people. That's point one. Point two is it's not the only route, and FE colleges, training and apprenticeships should have just as high esteem as having a degree. That's not always been true in this country. We need to change that. I think it is changing, and I see the pride in the apprentices that I met at Camelaird Shipyard or TfL or Gatwick Airport about the wonderful work that they're doing. And I think young people themselves are changing the way that they think about these routes. It is a really important feature of the Dutch system, and we need to make it a feature of ours too.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And final question, Steve Darling.
I'd imagined we'd be out of time, so I'm fine.
In which case, can I ask the first bit of this, because we haven't talked as much as we need to about disabled people, and if I could ask, if getting young people into work is your top priority, where does closing the disability employment gap come?
Yeah, it's really important, and of course there's an overlap because an increasing proportion of young people are, as we said earlier, registering for long-term sickness benefits. But I really want us to take this seriously. We haven't got into the access to work system this morning, which we might. We are employing 500 people to clear the backlog in that, which has bedeviled the scheme in recent years. And I told the department that wasn't good enough, and we had to clear this backlog, and we've got a plan to do that, which I think is really important. But more broad than access to work, and going to Ms. Ali's question about deficit models and so on, I think that we should be aiming for maximum participation. Sometimes that's work, but sometimes it's society too. And all this employment support and under the Pathways to Work banner, Connect to Work, Work Well, these other schemes, they are, if there's a philosophy that unites them, it is that you should have maximum participation, and that's what we will try to help you do. So it's very important for us, and we've got to keep going on it.
Thank you. Well, we look forward to your response to our employment support for disabled people report and disability at work, because we had a few suggestions on how you might do that in addition to access to work. That concludes our evidence sessions for today. Thank you so much, Secretary of State, and thank you, and have a very, very happy retirement, Peter. We have enjoyed having you here on this occasion, so thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Order.